Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 127th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, we're going to talk about the origins of gravity. If you're familiar with my content, I'm always trying to question where things come from, why things are the way they are, not just observing things, deducing a law, and saying that's how it is. Where does gravity come from? What's the logic behind gravity? What is mass? And so let's dive into it. Now, if you haven't watched one of my previous videos, I don't know exactly what episode it is, but I've made an episode about Tetris and the snake. And I highly advise you to look at that. So basically, this Tetris idea is that the universe is just one giant black hole where in the ultimate future, everything exists in that point. Everything is condensed there. It's like an infinite dense information density. Let's put it that way. Information density. And basically, we are the entire universe is just spiraling back into its ultimate future. And the information gets denser and denser the closer you get to the singularity. And that translates in our outer reality, for instance, if you're here, with a certain degree of complexity. So for instance, if you're here, there you have only a universe with planets but no life. Or maybe with even stars. You don't have, let's say you have stars, you don't have planets that are formed yet. And then when you're here in the loop, here let's say that's the moment where you have planets that appear, which increases the overall complexity of the universe. And then here is where life appears. And then here is where humans appear. Of course, I didn't draw this correctly, of course, so don't think that we're that close to the center. Actually, we're pretty far out because this is just the beginning of, going back to the singularity, because obviously we are just a planet awakening. We're not a galaxy awakening, so or a galaxy becoming conscious of itself. So, and so you can see that as you fall back into your ultimate future, then complexity increases. And here on this picture, on this drawing, you might think that it means that the universe compresses itself or something, that and while it is expanding in our outer reality. But that's the whole thing. This expansion is just a projection, an outward projection of the increase in information density. So as the information gets denser and denser, it just blows like bigger and bigger like a bubble. So it's almost like if you had this, let's say you had a slide here, a slide with a certain amount of information, and then light projects itself through that and then creates a holographic reality where you can navigate inside that information. Now, in reality, therefore, our universe is compressing and condensing, meaning that for the same, let's say, slide, you have more and more information contained in it. So the information density is increasing, but obviously the holographic projection of that information on the outside is increasing, is expanding. So that's modeling the universe as just being one giant black hole. Now, that's where gravity comes into play. In this three-dimensional reality where you have linear, and this is very important, linear time and space, by the way, linear time space, Basically, gravity, to put it plainly, is the force of attraction of the future. And what does that mean? It means that the future is denser than the past. And therefore, you're falling into your own future. Now, take for instance the solar system, right? The way that people draw it is like these planets orbiting around the sun. And this is completely wrong, obviously, because it shows like a static model. In reality, what happens is you have the sun that is moving at a very, very high speed, and then planets that are falling into the sun in various orbits, like this, basically. They're all falling into the sun, but because the sun is advancing at a very quick speed, they never catch up to the sun. If the sun were to stop into its tracks, the planets would simply all just crash right into the sun. But what does the sun represent? The sun is the future, the ultimate future of the entire solar system. So you could say that the planet Earth, is a subset of the future of the sun. How can I picture? Okay, so let's imagine that you as a human are falling into your future, and your organs, your bodily organs, are falling also into the same future, and you are an envelope for their future. Their future depends on your future. See? And so it's almost as if you, because you are a single envelope, an entity or a self-contained system, let's put it that way, you, how should I say this? So the reason why your organs stay put is because they are also falling into your future, basically. These organs are like the planets that are orbiting the sun, basically, for you, as a human. It's the link between the macro and the micro. So you can analyze reality as pockets of self-contained forms, let's put it that way, which fall into their future, and they have a certain links between each other. And gravity is what sort of sorts out the priorities and the relationships in terms of who falls into what future. So for instance, this is planet Earth, there are humans on top, and gravity is simply the fact that your future is attached to the future of the planet. The planet is falling into its own future, and you are falling into the future of the planet. And gravity basically ceases to affect you, at least the gravity of the planet, when you successfully manage to sever the connection between your future and the future of the planet. Like right now, we all know that if this planet were to lose its atmosphere, or that a huge asteroid would crash into it, your future is over. So your future is dependent on the future of the planet. And that is why you feel the force of gravity. But for instance, when you are in the astral plane, when you have an out-of-body experience, that part of you is no longer attached to the future of the planet. And that is why you can float around and do whatever you want. But your body's future is linked to the future of the planet. And that's why you feel gravity when your astral body doesn't. Now, what else can be said about this? So the first thing is, don't forget that gravity only exists ultimately in, again, a linear time space dimension, like this 3-dimensional reality. When you're in 5 dimensions, for instance, then the future and past no longer have different densities. It's all the same density. So how would that look like? I've already described that basically everything unravels and evolves at the same time. You have like this expanding wave from a center point. And what you do as a consciousness is you just surf the wave. So you start here and then you go like this in a spiral. And what we think the past is this. Looking back this way, this is what we think our past is. When in reality, what we've experienced is all kinds of levels of evolution here along the way, which are all different and unique. Like, for instance, if you take humanity's point of view of the past from this vantage point, which was like 5,000 years ago, then looking back, this is their past. They would think this is their past. Well, actually, it's a bit more complex than that, but let me just simplify this for you. And from that vantage point, they think the world is like 5,000 years old, and God created everything with a stroke of the wand. And then when you go to our reality here, then our past is the Big Bang, for instance. But you see this linearity. You're surfing in a certain direction, which is this way. And you cannot like kind of go and diverge and like going back or going forward. You can only move forward, basically. You're spiraling outwards on this expanding wave of the universe, just becoming more and more complex. But you're stuck. You can't move backwards. Just like when you're surfing on a wave. You cannot surf backwards on a wave. It always moves you forward in the same direction. What happens when you transition to 5 dimensions is you realize this is a 3-dimensional wave, not a 2-dimensional wave. Meaning suddenly you find yourself on a sphere, surfing on a sphere, rather than surfing on a 2-dimensional wave expanding. Now you realize it's a sphere that is expanding. And on that sphere, at any point in time when it's expanding, you can surf, like, obviously you can keep surfing like you did, but then you can also go backwards and you can surf in all kinds of directions. Because the sphere, try to imagine a 3-dimensional wave that you're riding. When you ride a wave on the ocean, it is a 2-dimensional wave essentially, because it moves. There's only the height is only a tiny portion of it, and that's what's pushing you forward. But now imagine that it's a 3-dimensional wave. So it actually moves upwards in a way. Like it doesn't move forward, it moves upwards, and now you can go about moving the ocean because it's all moving upwards. It's difficult to imagine, but just try. And so in that kind of situation here, you can see that gravity would function completely differently. There would still be gravity to some extent, but not at all in the same way than in this 2-dimensional one. You see? Because here you can visit some pasts and some futures, but not all of them. Not all of them, because it's a 3-dimensional sphere expanding, and as it expands, you can no longer access the previous point of expansion. And once you go to, this is like 4-dimensional. And then when you go to a hypersphere, that's when you have even more power to move about in reality, in existence, you could say. Because now you can, with a hypersphere, it's spheres that are interlocked into each other, and you can go and visit pasts that no longer are part of this evolution to tweak some things. And this is all just part of the evolution of your consciousness, of your level of consciousness, so you don't mess things up. Because even right here from our vantage point, anything we do in our present moment reverberates infinitely into this linear kind of thing, timeline. Imagine once you're on this 3D kind of sphere, your actions reverberate in 3 dimensions everywhere. So they affect everything. And in the hypersphere, even more. And so this butterfly effect gets more and more powerful, and you need to be more and more conscious of your actions, basically, so that you don't create a mess out of this universe and of this reality. And we can say what we want, but this reality, this experience that we're having is incredibly stable, incredibly well thought out. I mean, it's just incredible just how balanced everything is. I mean, and that can only be due to a really well thought out kind of system and process. So going back to gravity a little bit. So when you see an asteroid, for instance, entering into the gravity field of a planet, it just means that it's attracted to the potential that its future will be mixed with that of the planet. So its planet has like a kind of sphere of influence over surrounding things, and integrating them into its future. That is, like there's this singularity. And that's where all the information of everything that ever happened to this planet is contained. And that exerts an influence on things that come close to this, because then they integrate that potential future. And the mass or the size of planets, stars, whatever, the mass or the size reflect, how should I say, well, it's almost like a battle for controlling the future, almost like you want a bigger chunk of the future of the universe. And so you're pooling other things into your sphere of influence, into your future. And humans are very particular, because once we form a global collective organism, then we'll be kind of outside of this logic of and not as influenced by this field of trying to attract you into the future, because we'll have transcended this by going an extra dimension. And that is something I'll have to reflect on in future videos, because it's still a bit mind-boggling. But it's just a way of, because you completely shift your consciousness level and your way of viewing things, you can exist in a dimension which is not influenced by gravity. And if you want to, you can come back to that. And that is what will make ultimately space travel much easier. Because right now we are still extremely dense, in the sense that we are still very, very attached to our bodies and the material aspect of our bodies. But once we develop all the other aspects to our bodies, the fact that our consciousness is eternal, that we have other bodies besides the physical body, we'll be able to shift between these, make our body lighter, our physical body lighter, and increase the influence of the other bodies when we want to, when we have to, when we want to space travel, and then get back to a more dense state once we're near the planet, so we can have that experience. And so when you look at movies like Star Trek, or a series like Star Trek, which I really recommend, that is how it translates into form. So your consciousness evolves, and then you can create technologies which are just a form that expresses the level of consciousness you've reached, and that allows you to not be as influenced by this process of gravity, or the influence of, or a sphere of influence over the future of the universe. It's like the universe, this is the ultimate future of the universe, and then you're battling for spheres of influence, occupying spheres of influence on that future. And that's where gravity comes from. And then you have things like you can see planets colliding into each other or whatever. But ultimately, it's a tug of war for controlling the future in a 3D dimension, three-dimensional world. And like I'm saying, like the whole point is an increase in complexity. What humans can do now is ultimately what they'll be able to do once we reach the stage where humans form a global collective organism, will represent a planet becoming self-aware. And if you watch my previous videos, basically humans are biology becoming self-aware, so then you can have a conscious control over your biology. It's called placebo. A human collective becoming conscious on a planet is chemistry, becoming conscious of itself and being able to control its chemical processes. And then a solar system becoming conscious of itself is like physics becoming self-aware, which can control its physics. And then a galaxy becoming conscious of itself is like subparticles, like protons, electrons, neutrons becoming conscious of themselves, being able to control their, characteristics. And now just imagine how much more complex the interactions can become in this universe between planets, between everything, especially in a realm which will not be solely three-dimensional or material. The interactions are just a trillion times more complex. But in order for that to not result in chaos, you have to go through all the steps of evolution from, the cell to the human to forming a global collective conscious planet, and then various civilizations harmonizing their relations to form a solar system becoming conscious of itself. And at that point, the sun can almost start, interacting and moving in a way that is not linear, where it's not just falling into the future of the singularity, but where it's just moving around and doing things and stuff, and still obviously going into the singularity, but not in this kind of linear fashion. And ultimately, if you watched all my videos, I also say that this universe is just a game of light. We're just playing around with light. We are light, this planet is light. And the whole idea is, how can you build a game of light that can be experienced and that is stable and that is, where you can still have a kind of an experience that makes sense, and you just it doesn't fizzle out into chaos, total chaos and an absurd kind of reality. And, well, humans, for instance, are expanding their ability to sort of understand and interact with other kinds of ways of working and functioning via VR. Experiencing a game of light, which is a game of light, also a virtual one, and see if you can build an experience where you can make meaning or make sense of what you're experiencing. And this is like training. This is like training wheels for us for what is to come once we transition to a dimension where this planet is no longer bound by solely this kind of, where it's no longer a passive chemical kind of body, and where you can break out of this two-dimensional falling into the sun logic in a linear fashion. And so, yeah, just to summarize, so for me, gravity is just the relative effect that you have of falling into your own ultimate future on things around you and the relationships between them. So, it's like the sun is falling into its ultimate future, and whatever is inside the sun is falling inside its future, and it's all just nested futures basically. And then an attempt to increase your sphere of influence over the future. So that's where gravity comes from, in my mind, and that's what makes mass. Your mass is basically your possibility to influence the future around you. Let's put it that way. So obviously this is again like an improv video. I just had this illumination kind of 2 minutes ago. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free, and talk to you next time.